God has been so merciful to me to keep me alive, to keep me going through all the ups and downs of my life. My name's Lalor. I'm a priest of St. Patrick's Missionary Society, Kiltegan, County Wicklow. When I was 7 years old, a missionary priest came to my parish and spoke on a Sunday. And he had a very good way of explaining the importance of missionary work, which caught me. And on the following day, he came into the primary school and spoke to us again and asked us to do things like distributing a missionary magazine called Abbeyleix of St. Patrick's Society. And from that time, I suppose, it was always in a background in my mind. So I went through primary school, secondary school. A priest came from St. Patrick's Missionary Society to the secondary school, and I did speak to him tentatively at that time. But when I was finishing secondary school, I had to make up my mind. So I said I would join the St. Patrick's Society. And going in, I felt to myself that I will not be a priest, I will not make it, I will not be capable or be called properly to it. But I said the only way to find out is to go into the seminary. After 4 more years after that, I was ordained a priest and appointed to go to Kenya. The Kenyan people have been so good to me and so accepting and never making me feel a foreigner. And I think that has been so important and good in my life. And that has made my life, that's where the happiness of my life has come from. God has been so merciful to me to keep me alive, to keep me going through all the ups and downs of my life. And especially as I get older now, and I'm quite old, to be more aware of that death is not far away, and not to be anxious about it. But even I've discovered that I've had 4 or 5 operations of various kinds, but I'd never be anxious beforehand. Small things can annoy me and disturb me, but major things, no. I also have a habit of asking myself, now answer this question quick, don't think about it. And one day I asked myself, what do you like about yourself? And I answered quick, and the answer was, I'm generally happy. Now I was afraid to ask the other question, what do you not like about yourself? Because it would probably take me half an hour to say the things I don't like about myself. In general, my life has been very happy, very contented.
Father Eddie, thanks for being with us and sharing your story.
Thank you very much.
Would you mind just starting with what was your first impression of the missions or the missionary life? Irish people, I suppose, are renowned worldwide for bringing the light of the gospel to all corners of the globe. And how did that influence your life in the beginning, in the early stages? Was there something that happened in your childhood that gave you an introduction to missionary life?
Well, when I was 7 years old, a priest came from St. Patrick's, Kiltegan, St. Patrick's Missionary Society. So he preached on a Sunday in the church, and he especially emphasized the need to spread Christ's message in Africa. And the small amount of people, that was around 1947, long time ago. The small amount of people, even though there had been missionary work there for about 60 or 70 years, but there was a great need for the preaching of the gospel. And he explained it in a very special way, a very simple, profound way. And I remember my sister actually imitating him after Mass. She was imitating him. And the next day then he came into the school and he got us all to sell a magazine called Africa, which was St. Patrick's magazine. And he had a little competition. And that was my first really, even though I was only 7, my first real opening the notion of mission, of being a missionary. But I didn't say to myself, I'm going to be a priest, nothing like that, no.
Okay.
But it grew along in my years through primary school and into secondary school. And another priest came in secondary school, and he talked about missionary work again, and he was pretty good at it, obviously because he caught me. And so I decided to join with him, to join his group. I went in the year, 1956. I really thought, I didn't expect I would become a priest. I didn't expect I would be ordained. So I used to say to myself, why go there at all then? Well, it's the only way to find out is by going to the seminary and seeing the life there. And I studied in Cork for 3 years. I did science, then back to St. Patrick's, Kiltegan, and was ordained in 1964, yeah.
So as a young priest, Father Eddie, then you must have been early 20s?
24.
24. There's many, many differences between Ireland and Kenya. There's the world of differences. I think Kenya might have a population even alone of 50 million, something we can hardly
40,
even imagine.
40
million now,
but not as much then.
It's worlds apart.
Yes.
So can you just remember those very early days? What was the biggest change you remember from home?
The very early days, I think that I was teaching in a secondary school, a church school, and I was still a schoolboy. I hadn't adapted to the idea of, I was looking forward to free days and this sort of stuff. The same, it took me time in teaching, but also in celebrating Mass in outlying. We had a parish where I was, and there were outlying places where we went to visit different times, usually on a bicycle, and carrying a very large Mass box with. So, I gradually got into it. It took me a long time to learn Swahili because when you're dealing with students, you deal with them in English. So it took me a good while to learn Swahili.
Okay.
Then after 3 years or so, I was transferred into a parish. I then I was very keen on that, really. Also doing a little bit of hospital work then, but getting the hang of being with people. And at the time, Kenya had just transferred from being a colonial under the British government to an independent country, an independent republic. And people were feeling their way and very conscious of being a new country.
And how did the Kenyan people receive you as a father? Were they delighted that these missionaries were coming over?
Well, delighted would hardly be the word. They just took it for granted, really, And one thing I would like to say is that I was there 49 years. No Kenyan person ever hurt me, ever affected me, hurt my feelings. I mean, it's remarkable in that time. No one, people of many different religions, or 20% are Muslim. There'd be about, Catholic about 25%, Protestants of various kinds about 25%, and then people of traditional religion as well. But all of them, I would only say the very best.
Wow.
The very best. I felt very, very accepted, people were so kind, so nice. Even though there's a lot of difficulties there, but yes.
And even organising a parish must be a big task out there. Where do you even start?
Well, usually you see that there are already people who they've been part of a bigger parish, and then the parish is cut off, the new parish. But they have been part of a parish for a good while. But you have situations, I recall a place where there was, for Mass and that, schools were very important. That's one big difference that the Kenyan independence made, was that the Kenyan president and the people built many, many schools. They really put a huge effort into education and to health. And simple example, there was one very place out of the country, and there was a woman there, and she had a grandchild, and that grandchild was 12 years old, and she could read. But the old lady couldn't read, and 2 or 3 other people, 5 of them used to meet every Sunday and pray. And the girl who could read would read a little bit of prayer and read a little bit from the scripture. And that 4 or 5 people they have founded a church. It is they who are the founders of a church. It's not the priests or people like that. Those people, in a very simple passion, there's now a parish in that place. So the church grows from very small seeds, as Christ says, into what is strong. But it's really the efforts of the people. Like, people talk about missionaries, but it's really the heroes are the people who first accepted the faith and brought on the faith among themselves and met frequently, even when there was nobody to help them, to meeting in their own groups, etc. So it's been a wonderful, the growth of the church in Africa has been from the people.
So Father Eddie, you might just share a little bit about your experience in your mission work in Africa. You might have spent a little bit of time visiting prisons, I think. Was there anything in particular that touched you during that time?
Yeah, well, I was saying I wouldn't like to be a prison chaplain. The whole life of it, constant every day, I would find difficult. But I used to go to a prison. There was one particular place. It was called, I was living in a town called Nakuru, and it was on the side of a volcano. There was a volcano in the place, and there was a prison built up on the side of the volcano. A very kind of derelict kind of place, very poor quality land, etc. And the mountain, the mountain was called Menengai, which means, in the local people's language, I mean mountain of God. So I used to go there, and on a Thursday, first Thursday of every month, and I really hated it, because there were people in what they called capital remand, and there were about 70 or 80 of them. And it was very dark. There was only small little windows on the roof, and there was a terrible smell in the place and everything, men's place. Very difficult. And you went through one gate and that was closed. Then the second gate was open and that was closed again. You couldn't go any. The gates couldn't be open, so you went through it. So one day I said to the prisoners, I really find it difficult to come here. I'm finding it very difficult. I don't know whether it means anything to you, because you maybe you're just coming to Mass because it's something different to anything else, So I waited for a moment. We were all sitting on the ground in the prison, in this prison place. And I was sort of, nobody's going to say anything. So this man stood up and he said, we're put in here by the government. Nobody comes to see us. If somebody does, we cannot touch them. There's a glass between us. Nothing can be passed. But he says, when we have Mass, God comes to the first gate and the second gate and the third gate, and is in here with us. So I said to the people there, well, that's it. There's nothing more to be said. And I stood up and we went on with the Mass. But that has remained with me to this day. Very often you find that you can have Mass in a cathedral or in a special place. It doesn't really reverberate with you. When conditions are at their worst and most unexpected, that's when God strikes.
And did you find yourself, Father Eddie, strengthening? Did you find your own faith strengthening a lot because of the challenges that were happening around you? Or did you have much time to really just, I suppose, have that you and God time to really strengthen your own, even though you're helping everybody else? Did you find that you were really leaning on the Lord for that strength so that you could give it to others then when they needed it?
I didn't pray well, really. I wasn't great at praying. It was more in the events of the day, like in the mass. I used to pray, like say in the hospital, I pray in every ward, and maybe only 20% would be Catholic, but they would all want to pray. Even now, Muslims wouldn't really be that keen. It's kind of against their faith to pray, but it was in those situations, even praying with people, and if sometimes I'd pass a ward and they'd say, "You're not coming in today," and I said, "Well, I'm in a hurry now at the moment, I'll come back to you," but they would want to pray, yeah. And it was more in that sense, yeah, I did try to pray as well as I could, but it was more that kind of it was a mixture of trying to pray.
Your whole life is a prayer, your whole active service
I
is
wouldn't feel that, but it was a mixture of the inspiration. I think that, as I say, that it isn't from books and that you get God's presence, really, but God's presence, this might sound probably hypocritical on my part, really, to say this, but that God's presence was in these daily actions, and always, I say, catching you by surprise, catching you by surprise, constantly, yes, yeah.
And I suppose very often, even in my own circles, in my friends, people are praying, but very often they're looking for healing or praying for the miracles. But there's something about the African people that they have an acceptance of the suffering, and that can somehow bring the joy. I don't know if in Europe, if we're there yet, or does that come easier in Africa a little bit?
Well, I mentioned, at the beginning that people in Africa are very optimistic, and they had to be, because they would have had famines and deserts and all that. I've never worked in a desert, but I've been there many times. This optimism that people in Africa have is very, very amazing. Sometimes you feel it's almost unreal, it's not correct, but it is correct, because another thing just reminds me, when when I started in the hospital, I met this man of about 22 or 3 with guarded two he was a prisoner, and two people were guarding him, and guarding him was a waste of time. He had been beaten on the head, and he had no power in his arm or in his leg, so he couldn't escape anyway, right? So we chatted away, even though the guards were there. A bit embarrassing, you can't talk to people too easily. It's easier on your own. So he said to me, "Yes, I have this. I have no power in my arm, no power in my leg." He says, "But I have hope, and hope gives you power."
Lovely.
So that one now would be about 25 years ago, when that happened. But it still stays with me, how this man, in the most difficult of situations, could teach me, certainly taught me, that hope gives you power. And I think that's sort of epitomizes the approach of African people. They mightn't have articulated as well as he did there, but that hope does give us power, because even in people say, if you ask somebody, is he a good singer? Oh, he's hopeless. Is he a good runner? He's hopeless. Hopeless. Hopeless means useless. So without hope, you don't have power. But he was so right, I think.
I think you have gone through the no entry signs. A lot of people would hear being commissioned to Kenya and would be a no entry sign straight away, and you've broken through that one. Father Eddie, it's been such a privilege to hear your story, to witness to it, and just on behalf of all of us, just a huge thank you for your yes to God and your vocation. And I wish you every blessing in your vocation here in Portlaoise, as you continue to bless all of us for the final chapters as you go forward with the Lord.
What comes to me now is that I recall about Simeon. You know, when Christ was presented in the temple, he was brought in as a little baby, and Simeon had been waiting for this child, and God inspires him to recognize Jesus. And what does he call Jesus? He calls him the light of the nations. Isn't that a fantastic wording? That Christ is the light of the nations. And this child is the light of the nations. And this is why Pope Francis turns to the youth of the world now, that they are the people of, you are the people of optimism and hope, and that you are going out to be the light of the nations. You might have many other ambitions, but there's nothing as wonderful as to be the light of the nations. As Simeon was recognized, and as through God's inspiration said that this little child is the light of the nations. And as Christ grew up, he grew to be the light of the nations. He wasn't the light of the nations when he was just a little baby, but he grew to be the light of the nations. And so that is my hope for us, especially for the youth of the world, to set your heart on being the light of the nations, and that God will bless you in that. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
We live in a media age, of course, an age in which we get almost all of our information either from television or from the internet. Probably less and less of our information is coming through the traditional print media. So in that context, in today's world, an undertaking like Shalom World is incredibly important. And the efforts to catechize and to evangelize through television and through the internet is incredibly important in the world today. And I'm happy to say that my experience of Shalom has been entirely positive, and I am very happy to encourage everyone who's working as part of Shalom World in their efforts to bring the Catholic faith to the world around us. And also I give my special blessing on all those who are involved in Shalom, all those who are watching Shalom, and all the future viewers of Shalom. So thank you, and God bless you.